tales for dark nights.
The following performance is a third-round entry in the 2016 Evil Idol voice acting competition, and you, the listener, get to help decide who wins. If you'd like to hear more of this contestant, voting for them is simple and only takes a moment. Just click the thumbs up icon. Can't stand them? Then click the thumbs down icon instead, and cast them into the digital netherrealm from whence they came. You decide their fate. Good luck to all of our contestants.
Clean Getaway. Written by Absinthe Rose. Performed by Pendleton Arkwright for Chilling Tales for Dark Nights in the Evil Idol competition. Gavin ran through the sliding glass doors of Covington General's ER, immediately slowing to a walk as the hefty nurse with thick glasses glared at him over the top of old red frames and snapped, "No running." "Sorry." He apologized with a careless shrug. "Just trying to get upstairs before visiting hours are over." The nurse glanced at the wire-covered clock over her left shoulder, then back to Gavin with one raised eyebrow. "You have 7 minutes." Her voice was full of doubt. "Guess I better hurry then." He nodded and hurried around the corner towards the hall that would lead to the ground floor elevator bank. Once out of sight of the grumpy nurse, he slowed his pace again and sighed with relief, grateful to see the hall empty. He wasn't really here to visit anyone. It was just the first excuse that popped into his head. He hadn't thought about the possibility of running into anyone. All that had really been on his mind when he burst in was getting away from the scene of the crime as quickly as possible. Gavin reached the elevators and was greeted by an impossibly old man with strange reddish-brown eyes, sitting in what looked to be an antique wheelchair against the far wall.
"Good evening,"
the old man greeted, his voice surprisingly strong and deep, despite his frail appearance. "Hi," Gavin nodded curtly, reaching out to the elevator farthest from what he assumed was a patient from the elderly or psych ward, and smashing the call button 3 times in quick succession.
"What brings you here?"
the old man inquired, turning and wheeling his chair closer to Gavin. The chair squeaked irritatingly, its high-pitched creaks worse than nails on a chalkboard. "Visiting a friend." Gavin lied again, uncomfortable with the closeness of the old man and eager for the elevator to arrive.
"Really?"
The tone of his voice and the single raised eyebrow suggested he did not believe him. "Yeah, really," Gavin snapped, angry that this stranger, this nobody, this ancient waste of skin had the nerve to question his motives for being here. If he knew who he was talking to, he wouldn't dare to speak to him in such a way. If he knew the danger he was in just by being in his presence, he would be cowering in the corner with his rickety wheelchair, begging for his life. But instead he continued to speak.
"It's too late."
The old man winked.
"They won't let you up there."
Gavin took a step back, unnerved by the man, but not sure why. It wasn't like the bag of bones could stop him. "I think I'll give it a try anyway," he retorted.
"Suit yourself."
He shrugged, his strange eyes twinkling.
"But won't do you no good."
"Look here," Gavin shouted.
"Don,"
the old man interrupted. "What?"
"My apologies. I forgot to introduce myself." He extended his right hand. "My name is—" He paused for a moment, and Gavin wasn't sure if it was for dramatic flair, or if he was considering whether or not to reveal his full name, age, and address as part of his belated introduction. "Don."
He finished with a small tilt of his head, as if there were more he had to say, but decided it could wait. Gavin was caught off guard. He'd been prepared to rip the guy a new one just a moment ago. and now he found himself taking the offered hand, and shuddering slightly at the excessive warmth and 2 long fingers that wrapped around the back of his hand. "Gavin," he said, pulling his hand away and wiping the sweat that had formed in his palm on his pants.
"A pleasure,"
Don cooed. His voice seemed to have dropped an octave. "Yeah," Gavin grunted uncomfortably, taking a step back once again. He couldn't wait to be away from the strange old coot. Gavin was gratefully interrupted by the chime announcing the elevator's arrival, and was inside, pressing the closed door button before they had opened fully. He didn't want Don following him, but Don was still in his old chair, his long fingers fanned out and descending to his palm, pinky to pointer in a slow wave. Gavin glared at the old man as the door slid close, and felt a ripple of unease spread through his stomach as Don smiled back, his lips spreading unnaturally wide. Finally alone, Gavin considered defying the nurse and Don and heading upstairs anyway. But there was really no reason for him to be up there. He really did just need to lay low for a while. No sense risking an encounter with an overzealous security guard looking to make a name for himself. No, it would benefit him much more to stick to his original plan and go hide out in the underground parking garage, find a dark corner, far from any vehicles, and wait out any commotion caused by his earlier exploits. In the morning he'd seek out a car, one that was still warm, meaning the owner had just arrived and would not be coming back any time soon. Then by the time they realized it was missing and called the police, Gavin would already be long gone and have ditched the car. Gavin pressed the button that would send the elevator down to the parking garage and sighed heavily. He could almost relax now. He knew most elevators had surveillance cameras, so he couldn't pull out the wallet he'd stolen and see how much he scored, but he was guessing, by the fight she put up, it must be a lot. And that was good. Gavin didn't mind stealing. It was how he got most things he wanted. But he hadn't used cash in almost a week, and it was never good to push your luck when it came to shoplifting. Better to give it a rest for a few days. The elevator performed its stomach-dropping stop. The door slid open, and Gavin stepped into the parking garage. As the doors closed behind him, taking its light with it, he noticed just how dark the garage was. There were only a handful of lights scattered throughout the space, leaving large dark stretches of inky black shadow, plenty of places for him to hide out for the night. Perfect. Heading for the nearest patch of shadow, Gavin planned to follow the wall for a bit, put some distance between himself, the elevator, and the cars of anyone who might be leaving during the night. It was then, as he made his way through the dark, his eyes having quickly adjusted to the lack of light, that he noticed something odd. There was not a single car in sight. Usually people parked close to the elevator first in order to avoid a long walk, and people like himself who waited around to prey on those walking alone. But there wasn't a single vehicle to be seen. In fact, now that he was looking, there were no parking lines either, no handicap spots, no parking areas, not even a single school bus yellow metal post to prevent passage beyond certain points. He frowned, not sure why the condition of the parking garage made the hairs on his arms prickle, but it didn't matter, not really. He was alone finally, and that was all he cared about. Gavin stopped walking, chose a dark corner, and pressed his back against the cold concrete wall, sliding down into a cross-legged position. For all he knew, the garage was still under construction, or being repaired, nothing more. Relaxing, he leaned his head back against the wall, and hissed as a bolt of pain flashed through his head, and reminded him of the sharp blow the woman had delivered during their struggle. Gavin reached back, tenderly exploring the raised lump, and felt gobs of sticky, drying blood. "Hag," he muttered to himself. Then remembering that he had her wallet, he grinned. "A lot of good it did ya." Gavin reached into the waist of his jeans, where he'd tucked the long blue wallet as he watched the middle-aged woman weakly attempting to remove the switchblade from her gut. Eagerly he snapped it open, only to have his stomach clench in disappointment. The credit card slots were empty except for a single club member's card to the local grocery store and her driver's license. The cash slot held 3 $1 bills and a recipe for chicken parmesan, and the coin pocket on the backside held exactly 78 cents and a small silver rosary. Gavin could barely contain his rage. His head throbbed angrily as his pulse quickened with fury. This is what she fought so hard for? This is what she risked her life for? He had only planned to rob her, but then she hit him, struggled mightily against his aggression, and ignored his demands. He knew she had to be silenced before he got caught. She never saw the blade coming as he slipped it out of his pocket and into her abdomen. He had her wallet before she hit the ground. He almost felt bad. She was a decent-looking woman, and she had strangely forgiven him as he pulled the blade out, wiped it on her dress, and put it back in his pocket. Now, looking down at the meager contents of the stolen wallet, he wished he'd stuck around to watch her die. See if she still forgave him, as the last of her life bled out. Incensed by it all, Gavin picked up the rosary and tore it to pieces, sending tiny silver beads flying everywhere, followed by the crucifix, which he chucked as far as he could. It did not make him feel better. He was still broke, and now he had to hide out and spend the rest of the night reliving his epic failure. Snatching up the paltry amount of cash and stuffing it in his pocket alongside his knife, Gavin threw the wallet as well. He didn't care if anyone found it, or that his fingerprints were all over it. He knew he had a list of warrants a mile long, but no one had ever been able to serve him. A few more charges was nothing. Besides, it's not like he was going to get caught. He never got caught. Fury temporarily spent, Gavin decided to get some sleep. Hopefully when he woke it would be morning and he could get out of here. He took out his knife, flipped the blade out, and slid it beneath his leg as he stretched out on the cold floor. If anyone stumbled upon him while he slept, they would wish they hadn't. Gavin wasn't sure what woke him, or how long he'd been asleep, but he knew he needed to get up. Something was off. In a matter of seconds he was crouched, knife extended in front of him, head cocked, listening as he waited for his eyes to adjust to the lighting. But they didn't. Either he wasn't awake enough for them to clear completely, or it had gotten darker since he'd fallen asleep. As he stood, he realized it was the latter, for although he could see a few feet in front of him, beyond that was nothing but darkness. Not even a hint of one of the ceiling lights shone in the distance. Had someone turned off the lights? Why would they do that? Had they discovered he was down here? How? Dawn. The old man's wrinkled face and strange brown eyes filled his mind. Bastard must have gone straight to the nurse after he'd gotten on the elevator. How could he have been so stupid? He should have dragged the decrepit fool into the elevator with him. Then he could have disposed of him and had nothing to worry about till morning. Sighing in frustration at his terrible luck and lack of foresight, he silently began moving. If he was lucky, he wouldn't encounter any cops or security guards that may be looking for him, and could make his way to the ramp that led up and out. Reaching his free hand out, he decided it was better to use the wall as a guide than to wander blindly into the darkness. He was so focused on listening for any signs that someone was nearby that he didn't notice right away that the wall he was running his hand along was not concrete. He paused and explored the surface with his fingertips. It was rough, jagged, and warm, not at all like the wall he'd fallen asleep against. And when he placed his hand flat against the unidentifiable material, he felt a dull throb beneath his palm. Gavin yanked his hand away and wiped it on his pant leg to get rid of the peculiar sensation, before leaning in close to look at the wall. It was darker than concrete, and appeared to have thick strands of thread or hair protruding from its surface. What the hell? His examination was interrupted by a shuffling sound behind him, and he quickly spun away from the wall. He couldn't see anything, but it continued to grow louder and closer, until Gavin was certain he should be seeing the source by now. "Who's there?" he called out, hating himself for the slight tremor in his voice, but too on edge to care. The shuffling resumed, and Gavin backed up, running into the wall. But he hurriedly jumped away from it when he felt a few of the hairs brush across his arm. Deciding his best bet was to confront whoever was there, Gavin rushed forward, knife held out before him. But as soon as he got to where he thought the person should be, the sound stopped. He looked around in confusion. He was sure this was where it had come from, but he didn't see a thing. Not even the wall he had just stepped away from. What the hell was going on? He didn't care. All he cared about now was getting out. He'd had nothing but bad luck since coming across the woman he'd killed. He needed to get out, get to the wolf's den, kick back a few stiff drinks, and take any woman drunk enough to go home with him to bed. Then everything would be back on track. Just the thought of liquor burning its way down his throat and warming his belly got him into motion. He'd be out of there in no time. Holding tight to his switchblade, he lowered his arm to his side and he began to walk. He wasn't sure where he was headed, but he knew eventually he'd run into something that would give him an idea of which way to go. Gavin lost all sense of time as he walked. He knew it was partly due to the slow pace he was keeping, since his eyes still had not adjusted to the darkness. But still it seemed as though he should have found something by now. As he thought this, his eyes finally beheld a sight other than blackness, though it wasn't what he expected to see in a parking garage. Fog, thick and ghostly white, appeared in the distance, rolling and tumbling over itself like waves racing to reach the shoreline. It surged forward and spread out as if it had a purpose, as if it were seeking something, seeking him. Gavin didn't know why he thought this, but he felt absolutely certain it was true. Everything in him told him to run, to not let it touch him, but he stood his ground. Fog didn't just develop spontaneously wherever it felt like, especially not in buildings. It had to have come from outside, which meant that if he stayed in the direction he was facing, the direction it appeared out of, and walked into it, that it would have to lead to the surface. In fact, he must be close already. The parking garage wasn't that big. It was a great idea. Excited and commending himself on his brilliance, Gavin rushed to meet the fog, gasping in shock as they connected. There was no light chill of hovering moisture as he broke its surface. No barely perceptible resistance as it swirled around his legs and kissed his bare flesh. The moment he came in contact with the fog, it was as if he'd been enveloped by a superheated steam. He looked down, expecting to see his skin boiling off, his clothes catching fire, and the rubber of his sneakers melting to the floor. Instead, he saw the white fog change to a sickly yellow, then orange, red, and finally black. With each change, the intensity of the heat increased until Gavin could not draw a breath, scream, or comprehend anything beyond the pain. The heat slithered into every crease, pore, and orifice, melting his organs and turning his bones to dust. His skin cracked, split, and peeled away as his hair hissed and fizzled to nothing. His eyes burst in their sockets, and he was vaguely aware of the vitreous running down his ruined cheeks. Then, suddenly, as it began, it was over, and Gavin found himself on his hands and knees, pulling in huge gulps of air. The fog still surrounded him, but it was once again white and cool, and felt glorious against his strangely unmarred skin. What is going on, he wondered, as his breathing and heart rate slowly returned to normal. Am I going crazy? He didn't feel crazy. Although admittedly he didn't know what crazy actually felt like, he was still pretty sure he was sane. Am I dreaming, perhaps? Though he didn't think that was likely either, he would have woken by now. Shaking his head in confusion, Gavin picked his switchblade up from where he'd dropped it and stood up, realizing as he did that he'd become completely disoriented. He had no idea which way to go now. "Ah!" he screamed in frustration. His scream was answered. "Gavin," someone whispered his name loudly. He spun, looking for the source of the voice. "Gavin." It came again, still a whisper, but the pitch was different. "Gavin." And another. "Who are you?" Gavin shouted, turning slowly around, scanning the fog. but unable to pinpoint the source.
Gavin,
Gavin, Gavin,
Gavin.
Gavin. It sounded as if 100 different people were whispering his name now, over and over until it no longer sounded like his name, but a swarm of angry flies closing in on him. "What?" he shrieked. All at once the whispering stopped, and for a moment Gavin thought he'd gone deaf, but then they answered his question in unison. "Run." At that the fog was drawn together behind him and disappeared, like the flame of a candle that had been blown out. He was once again standing in the darkened garage, but this time he was not alone. Now he could see outlines in the distance, hovering at the edges of the darkest pools of shadow, waiting. It was with a nauseating sense of dread that Gavin realized not all of them were human. He hesitated only a moment before doing what the voices had commanded, and ran. The moment he began to move, so did the shadows, and they were fast. They hissed, groaned, wailed, and snarled, a cacophony of hatred and hunger chasing him. He knew without a doubt there was nothing they wanted more than to tear him apart and devour him. He was not going to let that happen. But he could feel them reaching for him. They were so close. A few managed to touch him, to tear his shirt and his skin. A dozen rivulets of blood flowed freely across his arms and back. He pushed himself harder, doing his best not to look back at them. He wasn't sure he could keep going if he saw what was after him. Gavin focused his gaze straight ahead, willing the exit or any means of escape to appear. And to his astonishment, it seemed to work. Miraculously, just a few dozen yards away was the elevator, its single fluorescent light signaling him like a beacon. Inside the elevator was Don. The weird old man sat in his wheelchair, grinning that same stupid grin he'd had when Gavin first left him, and he was holding the elevator door open. "Don!" Gavin called, never so happy to see someone in his entire life. "Don, wait for me!" He was so close, just a few more yards, just a minute more. That was when Gavin did the most cliché horror movie fail of all time. He tripped and crashed hard to the ground. He was a goner, he thought as he hurried to right himself, but instead of taking advantage of Gavin's mishap and pouncing upon him, the shadows stopped. He glanced slowly over his shoulder. They were still there, whispering agitatedly, but not moving. Confidence boosted, Gavin put his hand down to push himself up and laughed out loud when he saw the small silver crucifix he had thrown away earlier. Thinking now that it would make a funny souvenir, he picked it up, and immediately the woman's dying words filled his ears. "I forgive you." The garage started to grow dark once again, and Gavin saw that Dawn had let go of the elevator doors. "I don't need your forgiveness," he snapped, throwing the crucifix once again, failing to notice that the shadows parted around the small object as it flew past them. Panicking, Gavin darted towards the elevator. "Wait for me!" The old man halted the doors once more, nodding to the shadows as Gavin crashed into the elevator next to him. The shadows nodded in return and faded away as the doors closed. Gavin lay on the floor of the elevator, oblivious to the exchange that had just occurred. "Thanks, Don," he panted, one arm draped over his eyes. "You saved me."
Not exactly.
The voice was deep and hollow.
That you just threw away.
Gavin pulled his arm from his eyes and gaped in disbelief as the old man, once frail and fragile, stood tall, his wrinkles fading, skin smoothing and darkening, blistering and cracking until it looked like charred steak. The thin wisps of white hair grew thick and black before parting and forming an enormous pair of horns that curled over his head and across his shoulders. The reddish-brown eyes he found so peculiar turned scarlet and grew grotesquely, while his ever-grinning mouth widened and filled with row upon row of pointed gray teeth. Everything about the once old man kept shifting, warping, and changing. each metamorphosis more horrifying than the last as he filled the elevator and continued to speak.
You see, I didn't properly introduce myself earlier.
Thank you for listening. If you haven't already, don't forget to cast your vote for this contestant via either a thumbs up or thumbs down vote. By doing so, you'll help us determine who will become the next permanent member of our voice acting team. At the close of voting on September 23rd, based on your votes, the top 5 contestants will progress to the 4th and final round to take place live on October 31st at our annual Halloween live stream event, based entirely on your votes. Thank you for voting and for helping to spread the word. You're listening to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. I'm Steve Taylor, host of Chilling Tales, the podcast, encouraging you to turn off the lights and turn on the dark.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.